Good afternoon, everyone from the southwest of England. My name's John Milne, and I'm joined this afternoon by Jimmy Beale, the founder of the English Education. We are delighted that you're joining us from around the world today. We have guests joining us from Brazil, from Jordan, from India, and Ireland, as well as numerous guests from the United Kingdom. So it's wonderful to see you here and to have the opportunity to learn a little bit more about boarding schools in the UK, the current landscape, and why we believe that the opportunity for young people in the United Kingdom in boarding schools is one of the best gifts that you can give them, particularly in the current climate. Before I introduce my colleague, Jimmy Beale, just a little bit of background information about myself. I am a former headmaster of a boarding school in the southwest, Clifton College in Bristol. Prior to that, I had spent some time in boarding schools in England before a 10-year stint in Asia working in British schools and American international schools. So my passion has always been for international education, for working with international students, their families, agents, and of course, education groups. Jimmy, would you like to give a bit of a background information to our guest today before then explaining what the English Education is all about?
Yeah, thanks very much, John. Thank you for that introduction, and welcome to you all wherever you may be. Jimmy Beale. Like John, I'm a former independent boarding schools headmaster. I had a 20-year career in schools. And it came out of my headship in 2013, fancying a career in business, and set up the English Education, which is a school placement consultancy working with international families from all over the world, helping them to place their child in the right school. I was a schools inspector, and part of the reason we do this is we have a pretty good network into the boarding schools. We know a lot of the heads, and hopefully can advise parents with integrity and a genuine commitment to make sure that their children end up in the right school. And we'll talk more about why that is important later on. The English Education started with a few clients, mostly actually from West Africa initially and mainland China. But it has spread, and we now offer our support and services to all parts of the world and have clients from all continents. We work with any of the great British boarding schools, so we're not actually tied to any specific schools in terms of our advice. John, any more needed? Or
no, that's great. Thanks, Jimmy. So just for our guests, today is an opportunity for me to quiz Jimmy, because he's very much at the front end and the pointy end of working with schools. And of course, we're very happy to answer any questions as we go along. You can hear us, we can't hear you, but if you do have any questions, please do populate the questions channel, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen. And I will ask Jimmy or answer myself as we go along, or if we don't have time, we'll reserve some opportunity at the end to delve into those interesting questions. But I hope wherever you are, you're safe, and let's get into some of the detail. So Jimmy, if you're overseas and you're considering boarding schools in the UK for your child, why are UK boarding schools considered the gold standard? What makes them stand out, just at a very high level, before we talk about the experience?
Yeah, and I think, and just before I answer that question, John, and it's a very good question, but just encourage all those who are listening, please, to send in questions. John and I, as you will see, are both working from home at the moment. We're not in our office in Bristol as often as we'd like to be. So I have too much time answering John's questions on a daily basis. So if you can ask your own questions, that would be really, really nice. Why are UK schools of a gold standard? I think the first thing has to come down to academic capabilities, and an assurance from all the schools we work with, all the schools in the UK rather, that they will push the individual. They're not all deeply selective. and they don't all promise to get your child into Oxford and Cambridge, for the single reason that it is not always right for every child to attend the most selective of universities. For me, English boarding schools are almost unique in that they match high academic standards with something that is and has been developed over such a long, deep history, and that is the pastoral care that they show for each individual child. Most importantly, for those who come from international backgrounds, who may come from very different cultures, the key thing is the welcome. I'm a huge believer, and was as I moved up through education to headmastership, that if your children are happy, and that can be a glib phrase, but if they are fundamentally happy and they are secure and they're being challenged as young individuals, where they feel they're in an environment that they're known and supported, they will do better than if they're in a school where they're constantly thinking, am I really the right person for this school? That match is key. British boarding education leads people onto wonderful careers, not only because of the fantastic academic qualifications it gives, but also it allows children to develop into the sorts of adults, young adults, that I hope we as adults would like to see sitting in front of us, whether as members of our family or joining our companies as new employees. Key life skills are promoted through boarding education, and I hope we can unpick a few more of those later on, John.
Great, thanks, Jimmy. And just in terms of how the academic year runs in the UK for all students, and perhaps unpick a little bit the difference just briefly between independent schools and maintained schools, and then also the sorts of exams that the students will end up taking typically.
Yeah, I think easier to start with, just making an odd note there, the key thing is to start with the school years. So we don't have grades over here, we have school years. And basically one starts school at the age of 5. An academic year in the UK starts on the 1st of September and it ends the following August 31st. So people leave school in the UK at the end of year 13, and that is the year in which they have turned 18. That's the norm. So the academic year always starts in September after usually an 8-week summer holiday. There are 3 terms. We call them terms rather than semesters. There's an autumn term or a Christmas term, a spring term, and then a summer term. The summer term has the formal national examinations in it before the children go off for a long, well-earned break. The differences between the fee-paying sector and government schools, it comes down to the wording that is used, which often causes, I'm afraid, a little bit of confusion. 93% of children in the UK are educated in government schools. Those schools are provided by the government and they are funded out of the taxes that every taxpayer in the UK pays. About 7% of our children go to independent or fee-paying schools, and those fees don't actually vary quite as much as you think they might. Day fees are cheaper than boarding fees. The difficulty comes in the phraseology and the terminology used for the independent sector. They're called private schools. They're also called independent schools. And sometimes they are called, groups within them are called public schools. Now, those public schools are not public schools as in the American and other senses that they are government funded. They are some of the most traditional and old-fashioned and oldest of the independent fee-paying schools. If that's caused much confusion, please don't worry, you wouldn't be the only one to be confused, but just do tap any questions away and we'll answer them if I have caused chaos with that answer.
And Jimmy, just on the point of A-levels, because many international families will be more used to the IB or the International Baccalaureate, what are the key differences you could say? in
Yeah.
terms of UK universities? Is one preferred over the other, or are they considered based on their own merits?
Yeah, I mean, I think you asked earlier about the differences between the systems and boarding schools. Our children take in essence two big sets of national examinations. Those are taken when they're 16 in year 11, and then year 13 in when they're 18. The GCSEs or IGCSEs are general secondary certificates of education. Children will take a broad range of subjects, usually between 8 and 10, and there'll be a bit of maths, a bit of science, languages, etc. That then leads them on to years 12 and 13. They have choices to do A levels or the IB, and there are some other vocational qualifications available, BTECs, etc. But most of the good boarding schools will focus upon the A levels or IB. The difference being with the International Baccalaureate Diploma is that children will continue with more depth and breadth of subjects, whereas the A level, they'll be narrowing down probably to 3 subjects. Now, how is that important for universities and its applicability not only to universities in the UK, but also to around the world? Children, therefore, at the age of 16, might have to think more closely about the direction in which they are interested for post-school. If you want to be a doctor and you are doing A levels, you are going to be doing biology and chemistry and maths and maybe a 4th subject, but you're going down the scientific route. If you are more creative, humanities, arts, then you might choose an art and a sociology, psychology, and English A levels. The IB diploma, many of you will know, allows you to be choosing subjects from different groups. Both of these systems are highly regarded not only by UK universities, but by universities all over the world. We have seen recently, and certainly in the last 5 years, a far greater percentage of boarding school pupils looking to universities, global leading universities, whether they be in America, Asia, elsewhere. Because, to go back to the original point about academic standards, the universities appreciate that the children have been well taught, have been pushed, and most importantly, have garnished a sense of independent learning and creativity in their learning. The UK system is not about sitting children in front of a board and telling children to learn facts and then regurgitating them at the end for an examination system and getting 99%. I've got to be honest with you, as an educator, that isn't going to help the world. The world needs people in this century who are creative risk takers and have the ability when they're young to say, yeah, I got that one wrong, but this is how I'm going to learn. A long-winded answer, but no, I hope gives you.
No, not at all. And before we delve into the detail of the experience that a young person would get from a UK boarding school, can you just give us an understanding from your own experience at the moment on how are schools coping with the current pandemic? Because there is obviously the perception outside of the UK that COVID is not under control, and to an extent that is the case. But in terms of the actual experience of your average boarder in a UK school, what's it like at the moment? What are the pros and cons?
I think, I mean, you make a very good point, John, there between the national political image that we as a country have painted of how we as a country have managed it for our citizens. And that is hugely different from the way that schools have reacted. Imagine being a school headmaster, and I do frequently in these times, and suddenly you are met at the end of the spring term with school closure, schools not being allowed to come back in, children not being allowed to come back in, teachers not being allowed to come back in, and what do you do? It has caused chaos in our education, but not in the independent boarding sector, which I think everybody across the world would say has handled this beautifully. They put into place almost overnight superb online teaching systems that also maintained some degree of that pastoral understanding, so that the teachers really were delivering to children and answering their individual questions. It wasn't just Zoom by default and dump and run with knowledge. Far, far better than that. That allowed the parents who were considering possibly is the independent school right for the following September, i.e. the start of the new year, the new academic year that we have just commenced, or commenced in September. That started them to think, right, these schools really know what they're doing. Then we had the issue of international borders, flying home and coming back into a time that was hugely uncertain the world over. What the schools have done is they've put into place the best quarantining, the best screening, and the best communication between home, medical centres, teachers, so that parents have absolute confidence that as soon as their child has arrived in the UK and has been picked up by school representatives, they can be at the school, they can be tested, if necessary, they can be quarantined. And that if they are at the school, they're probably as safe as anywhere they can be, because the health and safety and the school inspection regime, one that I'm very au fait with, is hugely focused upon child welfare, safeguarding, and making sure that children are well looked after. No one does it better than the independent schools, and some of the articles we have recently pushed out just go to amplify the care and attention. Should parents be worried? Of course you would be worried if you were thinking of sending your darling son or daughter across the world. But don't confuse the way that our bigger nation and our bigger government has got it wrong, got it right, whatever your opinion is. Don't confuse it with the way, please, that the management teams and leaderships of fantastic schools have looked after the children. And I know they will continue to do so. We are all hugely looking forward to the regime of vaccination that is just around the corner. And there's a really good feeling in the country in the last couple of days about that. But schools are safe places.
Yeah. I mean, I'd certainly echo that. My son is at a boarding school in the UK, and his experience has been quite remarkable. The care and attention with which the school has looked at his daily routine, not just simply to keep him safe, but also to maximize his opportunities to be the social animal that he is, but also to enjoy the sport and the music and the drama in a slightly different way, but nevertheless in a way that still keeps a sense of normality. So I think the schools are doing a wonderful job.
John, absolutely right. I was talking to a boy, a client of mine, who is from Budapest, and he has been learning how to play rugby. He had never played rugby before, and whilst he wasn't forced to do so, he thought, I'll give it a go, because he's one of those good chaps. He is now playing some sort of controlled rugby. And for those of you who don't know, it can be a brutal, very physical game where close human contact is absolutely part of the game. They're not playing it with the physical contact at the moment. Are they loving their rugby? Of course they are, because they are still committed to teamwork, communication, getting outside, physical exercise, which allows them then to go back into the classroom and have more energy because of all the good stuff rushing around inside them. So yeah, whilst the offer is slightly different, it is still really applicable and appropriate for children from anywhere in the world.
Yeah, great. Just a reminder to our guests, we've got one question already, which I'll hold over for 5 or 10 minutes until we're a bit more into the webinar. But Jimmy, just in terms of developing this idea of the experience, when are the normal entry points for students from overseas into boarding schools? And can you just talk a little bit more about what the opportunities are once they enter, perhaps at a certain stage, whether it's at an older age or perhaps a younger age?
Yeah, okay. The classic entry points to UK independent schools and boarding schools are 13 and 16. Now, that's at the start of year 9 and the start of UK year 12. Some children do come across from international backgrounds younger, and they start as pupils, sometimes at the age of 10 or 11, when they're in year 6 or year 7. And they go to junior schools and then on to senior schools, which usually start at 13 plus. Historically, the greatest number of international students has been at 16 plus. And the newer the market in terms of reaching out to the UK, parents think, okay, let's try it for the last 2 years of their formal education. Usually they do so, hoping that their children might then stay on in Europe or possibly move to America, Canada to university. I would obviously say, to make the most of the full experience, 13 is a really, really good age to do so. And whilst we don't need to touch on too much about application in this webinar, the longer you give it and the longer the period you actually start taking advice and looking at which is the right school for your child, the better the decision you'll make. And to be quite honest, this year is slightly different, I have to say, but normally, if you are looking for application for September, let's say 2021, a lot of the good schools are full up now. They've gone through their application process, senior schools. And if you leave it to January, February, March, there will always be places later on. And I will relate that to the excellent question that's come in from Abdel that we will be answering later on, because it's a cracking question that unpicks a lot of what we're saying. Those are the classic entry points. Opportunities, clearly the younger the child, the more the school would be looking at their potential and how much they really want to take part in a massive range of opportunities, so that by the age of 16, by the sixth form, they have to some degree specialise. They know enough about themselves and what makes them tick. If looking for a place for 16 plus, schools still want children who are going to make the most of the broader experience, but fundamentally they're looking for boys and girls who will be able to choose their academic subjects and knuckle down, and with the great support and advice from the teaching staff, will make the most of the opportunities they're given in the classroom to really secure a place at the best university they can get to. And they will set clear targets, clear goals, and all of that will be communicated with parents. And one of the best things about a boarding school education is the triangulation between home, child, and school. That you as parents should be fully aware of the decisions that your child is making in consultation with experts. And that's why you pay the fees.
Yeah, great. And in terms of those entry points and relating to the question coming in from Abdul, the question is that in the early 90s and then again in 2008 to 2011, in UK schools, the numbers of local UK nationals as day pupils and or as boarders declined, and therefore boarding schools really increased their intake of international students. What's likely to happen post-COVID in terms of the profile of these schools? Will we see another decline in UK pupils and an increase in internationals, or is there another dynamic going on?
It's a huge and very important question. You're absolutely right in that local pupil numbers dropped off significantly, partly to do with recession, affordability, but also to do with a change in parental aspiration, that more parents actually wanted their children to be educated at day schools and keep them at home. Fewer, for example, boarding parents who were in the armed forces were able to pay for it because the government grants, etc., went. So there was a big shift in the market. Yes, the schools were suffering from numbers, and schools are businesses, and they needed children. Those that recruited internationally without strategy are still in the same boat. They very often went off to one or two markets that they considered to be the low-hanging fruit, and they brought back significant numbers of children from possibly one or two countries. Many of them, and this is in no way a judgment of those countries because they're very fine pupils, but many from mainland China and Hong Kong. And schools recognized that if they took commercially too many children from one country, it changed the focus of the school, and actually then possibly more local or other international boarding parents would say that's not the school for me. Some of those schools now have gone to almost being entirely international schools and possibly entirely from one or two nations. However, the schools we work with will have, and whilst it sounds rather odd, will have numbers, they will have quotas. And they will say out of our full boarding community, we will have maybe 35% of international boarders, which is a very good thing for any boarding community to have a wide nationality branch. But within that 30, let's say, percent, consider that 100%. They may say they only want 20% from any one country, so that you don't get this concept of it all being from one nation. How will it change in the future? Really interesting, actually. When it came to June, July, and August in terms of recruitment, some parents did pull out entirely, particularly those from Hong Kong and China, funnily enough. But others came, and if there were quarantining issues, they continued to learn online. But actually, we didn't see in the boarding schools the drop-off that had been anticipated, partly because their current parents knew they'd done a fantastic job during lockdown, and with online education, they thought, wow, this is really, really good. But also some schools are not only full boarding schools, but they have day pupils as well. And there has been a significant shift away from the maintained sector, with many of the good day and boarding schools picking up local clients who come in because they realize that these schools are so fantastic. Schools are not out of the woods, but they are feeling very optimistic about the future. The good schools will continue to work in a balanced and strategic way to get boys and girls from all over the world, which is a truly, truly fantastic thing, not only for the boys and girls from all around the world, but also from the homegrown UK boys and girls who learn so much from their counterparts from all over the world and make lifelong friendships and contacts that really do make a difference to their lives.
That's great. Thanks, Jimmy. And in terms of being overseas, we all like a good brand, and we all know top universities and certain names spring to mind. And similarly with boarding schools, there are certain names and certain schools that jump out at you, and you automatically think, well, they must be the best, and I want to get my child into those schools. I mean, set aside the fact that they might not be appropriate schools or the best school for your child, how would you go about discerning between a branded top name school and perhaps another school that equally has either as good academic results and, or as we know in many instances, better academic results and potentially more opportunities? How do you go through that filtering process?
But that's a great question. I think the parents have to ask themselves, why are they fascinated initially by brand? And with a lot of the clients we work with, I have to say those schools are superb and their results are superb, and their proven track record of getting boys and or girls, maybe single-sex schools, to the world's best university. That's proven. The numbers back up that if you go to these schools, you are very, very likely to get to some of the best universities and therefore the best opportunities. But is that right for your child? A, would your child cope academically to get into those schools? And B, even if they are academic enough, would they be happy with that structure? So you need to speak to people who know why your child, or rather what will make your child tick. And those of us who offer the consultancy, that's our job to do so. And we support that with academic profiling as well as personality profiling, and also, really importantly, the aspirations of parents. I start with so many mums and dads who say that they want, and I'll throw the name out, they want their children to go to Eton. If they tell me that they want their daughter to go to Eton, I realise that they really don't know terribly much about the market, because girls can't. But I then say why. We often then end up talking much more about value-added education. In my opinion, as an educationalist, the best schools are not necessarily the ones that take children at 13 who are almost by attending school and turning up and listening, they are so bright that they are going to get the top grades at the end. Deeply selective schools. Now, they do a fantastic job in ensuring that the boys and girls carry on with their academic trajectory, and they do very well. I really admire the schools, the sorts of schools that I worked in, who will look at a child and say, okay, this could be a grade 5 child, but we're going to push them at GCSEs to be getting grade 6s, 7s, 8s, and 9s, not just because of the classroom education, but because these children are stimulated, happy, fulfilled, challenged, etc. This is about a holistic education. So please don't be fascinated by name alone. You have to really dig in and under the skin of a school to find out about why it might suit your child. Eton, Harrow, Wickham Abbey, St Paul's for boys and girls are not right for everybody. Simon Henderson, from the headmaster of Eton College, said exactly the same thing himself recently. He said that Eton College is right for some boys, but it is not right for about 99.9% of boys across the world. It has a very particular atmosphere and way of doing things, and it does brilliantly with the right boy, but it would be a disaster to send the wrong boy to Eton just because it's got a great name.
And in terms of getting our children into the best schools that we can, what sort of lead-in time and timeline are we looking at, and what does the process entail? Let's just imagine I want my son to go to sixth form at a competitive school in the UK. How far out should I start?
Yeah, okay. I think that's a really good question, and I think I can relate it back in some way to Abdel's excellent question about selectivity and recruitment. If you understand as parents that certain schools are more selective, they are more difficult to get into, and they will scrutinize your child's academic previous performance and their potential, scrutinize it far further, they need a much greater lag time. They would be the sorts of schools that will run in the November or the October before entry. They will be running their own assessments, possibly visits to the schools, interviews, etc. And they will insist on those. And if you don't do them, there is going to be no place. However, there are many schools that if you are looking to place your child on the September the 4th, they might even accept you in August. But those are not necessarily the best schools. And some of them will be far less willing or just won't look in as much detail about the academic standards of their applicants, because commercially they need someone in that seat. And some schools have got themselves in real difficulties and are often then gone too broadly to the international market to stay afloat, to be quite simple. The selective schools, and we could mention many of them, and then the middle tier selective schools, they scrutinize and they really insist on finding out children as the right fit. And that's why they're prepared to work with consultant advisors like us, because they know we do our job in getting to know the children and the families well. It is essential for parents, if you're coming from abroad, that either you or a representative go to the school and visit it.
Great. And in terms of, we've got about 10 minutes left or so.
Yeah.
In terms of where the students end up, can you just talk a little bit about the range of universities that are on offer and how UK boarding schools will help those and enable those students to get into the best courses and the best universities for them, whether it's in the UK and or potentially in Europe and or US, Canada?
Yeah, and I think this is one where the independent sector, as you move towards the age of 16, 17, they work so hard on the individual. They will all have a careers office, a higher education office, and every child at a good boarding school will have opportunity not only to have formal assessments and formal interviews with those careers and higher education staff. They will be given advice that will be shared with parents in reports and parents' evenings. to continue the theme of ending up at the right place. Very important that young people have targets and have aspirations. It is also very important that young people understand that not all of them are going to end up at the top flight academic universities. So therefore, any advice in schools has to be honest, it has to be timely, but it must also always be giving hope for children that they've got something to work towards. The key thing is that they end up at a university that prepares them in the best way for the world of work and relationships in the world of work beyond university. There are fewer children, I think, now who go. No, it's not quite true. There are some children who go from boarding schools directly into the world of work with apprenticeships, but the majority of them go on to higher education, and therefore it's vital that they make the right choices. Both of us, John, have been through that with eldest daughters. And they're at very different universities, but I think they're probably both happy in their own way. That as parents is what we need. We still need the element of challenge from schools, however, to make sure that the children extend themselves.
Great. So Jimmy, before we go into some questions, do you want to take a moment or two just to describe the two different models that exist within the English education?
Yeah. I started the company in 2015 working with individual families on an obligation that I would support them in getting their child into the right school. And I use the term the right school always to mean that it's going to be the right fit where the child will succeed and grow. In 2020, we set up a new guaranteed placement service. So that bespoke service continues, but we set up a guaranteed placement service where we went to 40 of, I think, the best schools for international boarders in the UK. Schools of varying degrees of selectivity, but all of them have a common theme in that they do boarding beautifully for international boys and girls. And yes, that's the guaranteed placement service. And in essence, we will, once we have assessed a child and we come back to our parents or the parents and say, yeah, we can guarantee your child a place at one of these 40 schools. We then go to work and ensure that your child is placed at one of those really good schools. You leave the choice up to us because we will get it right and your children will be well served. The schools love it because they know that they will only be getting children from all around the world who are really, really well suited to their school because they understand that we know the schools. So yeah, those are the two models. Slightly different consultancy fee points, but the choice is out there, and obviously full details of that are on our website, theenglisheducation.co.uk.
Thanks, Jimmy. And we've talked a lot about selection and brand and academic rigor and outcomes. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of schools, from my experience, and certainly universities, in addition to that basic level, are also looking for wonderful human beings and interesting human beings. I mean, if you're aspiring to send your child to a boarding school and or to a UK university, in addition to working hard academically, what are the sorts of soft skills that you could be encouraging your child to develop over the next 2 to 3 years?
That's a great question. I think having talked to recently a number of heads in webinars like this and taking their thoughts out to the world. The last one we had Lee Glazer and James Murphy O'Connor and George Budd on, and we were trying to unpick the applications that they liked to receive from international boys and girls. The key thing for them was that the children were prepared to work hard at whatever they do in school. Work hard, whether that's academically, on the sports field, whether you're doing drama or art, making friends, you work hard at it. And the second thing was to give things a go. So be prepared to take a risk and say, well, I haven't done this and I'm not sure I do like it, but I'm going to give it a go, because only when you've given it a go and you've persevered and you say, it's not for me, That's the only time you can give something up. And then the third thing is that you are prepared to come and have fun. And whilst that sounds rather lame, James Murphy O'Connor from Haberdashers Monmouth, the principal of those schools, excellently described boarding schools as a place where fun is compulsory. It's a place to come and have fun. And fun doesn't necessarily mean giggles all the time and being naughty. It means actually having a joy for learning. So the schools will, through interview and through references, try and unpick some of these intrinsic characteristics of boys and girls to welcome into their schools. Because if you're going to turn up and you're going to say, I'm only interested in maths, and I'm not going to do anything but maths for 2 years, British boarding schools are not right for you. They are going to hope that you will come out of your shell and you will find so much more than just maths, and you'll be given every opportunity to do so. Just to mention my own daughter here, John, she's now in her 3rd year at university and starting on graduate schemes for employment. The question she gets asked more, she never asked really about her A-level results and all that hard work she did at school, because her degree will surpass that. She's asked about the things she has done in the world of work, what temporary jobs she's done. And always it comes down to something called the Duke of Edinburgh, where she was very proud to attain her gold award. And for those of you who don't know what the Duke of Edinburgh Gold Award is, have a look and see the commitment that my daughter and many other children, not that many other children, put in to be rewarded. It's an astonishing thing. If you do that sort of thing at a boarding school and you make the most of the opportunities, the world really is your oyster, and it will open up. But you have to go that step further, and that needs some basic internal combustion that you are prepared to give things a go.
Yeah, great. And we've got another question in again from Abdul, and it's really around. There are some mature markets, as we know, in China, Hong Kong, Russia, Nigeria, and Ghana, where understanding the value of boarding schools is understood. But for those markets where perhaps parents need a little bit more convincing, and perhaps some emerging markets where boarding schools are only now becoming a necessity, what are the sorts of key messages that we or some of our friends on the webinar can promote on our behalf to encourage people to consider the UK boarding landscape?
I think the first thing, and it's a great question, wherever you might be in the Middle East or in parts of, John, we've been working with some amazing countries recently in pushing the message of British boarding education out, because it seldom falls on a rocky path. People talk about education. Affordability is clearly something, and one of the first things we have to do is to explain the fee structure over here. But then the opportunities that are available, we are always working with emerging markets, and I'm always fascinated to make contact with people who would help us to spread the word about British boarding in such emerging markets. I think the Middle East, Abdul, was mentioned there by you. Yeah, there are too few boys and girls who come across to the UK boarding sector from many of the countries in the Middle East, and I think it's just because they don't really perceive it as being the right thing to do, or that the opportunity exists. That's the message we need to be pushing out, because a good UK boarding education is right for any child. In your same message, you talk about Hong Kong, China, and Russia. Russia has not been, for the last few years, a particularly close market to UK boarding schools. It was very much so in the 90s and early 21st century. Less so at the moment. Schools are, and they tell me on a daily basis, so keen to hear from different countries and different families with different backgrounds. They really want breadth. So bring it on, please.
Great. Okay. So Jimmy, just wrapping up, last 2 or 3 minutes, is there anything that you want to add just to round everything off? Any key messages that you want to promote I know that you're particularly keen on having that initial consultation with guests who perhaps have some questions, because it's never possible to answer every question during a webinar. But
no, absolutely. I mean, I would like to extend, all of those of you who've shown us the courtesy to come and join in with this chat around the subject. I can't hope to answer every question for you as individuals. You will all have out there your own specific agendas, and most importantly, you've got your own children, and they're all different, every single one of them. If you do want to chat, whether it's on Zoom or WeChat or WhatsApp, whatever it might be, please make contact with us and have a no obligation free chat with me for 20 minutes and explain your thinking, and I can bounce back with my initial ideas. Whether you want to work with English education moving forward, please, I'd be delighted to do so. Really would.
Thank you, Jimmy. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Just a final reminder from me: if you do belong to a community and or you're interested in working on behalf of the English education within a particular region to promote our work, please do get in touch. We do have regular webinars with headmasters and headmistresses. In fact, our next webinar with 3 heads is coming up on the 4th of December. So I would encourage you to sign up for that, to really get under the skin of boarding schools and to hear those heads and headmistresses that are at the front line. And then, of course, in January, February, we'll be branching out and we'll be having some webinars with some students. So again, a great opportunity to hear directly from the students themselves what the experience is like in an international boarding school. But thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that this is very much the start of a journey with the English education. And to Jimmy's point, if you are interested in a quick catch-up or an introductory chat, please do get in touch. We'll finish just with a short video, and you will be receiving a copy of this webinar. So again, if you'd like to review it or forward it to anyone in your network, we'd be very grateful. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us. Thank you.